Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the second essay of The Spectator, the one that was written by Richard Steele. And in this essay, if you remember from what we were discussing in the last lecture, he's talking about Sir Roger de Coverley and how Sir Roger de Coverley embodied in himself the spirit of the noblemen of those times. Since I promised to tell you a little about the etiquette, let me go into that before we come to the remainder part of this essay that has been written by Richard Steele. Etiquette at this point in time, in the place that we're discussing, that is England, and specifically London, etiquette became a very important word. It covered all aspects of life, but most of the implementation concerned your conduct in company. And when I say conduct in company, it means conduct in the presence of other people. Now, when we talk about conduct, we have certain standards, certain traditions in each family, and there is what we call culture. And when we say that such and such a thing is not a part of our culture, it means that there's a set of habits which are inculcated in us from the time when we are very small, from the time when we first set out to take our place in society. Now, etiquette, as it applies to the time of Richard Steele and Joseph Addison, became a very important part of life. And the etiquette that Roger de Coverley's description focuses on, particularly the reference to the heartbreak that he suffered when this beautiful widow from the next county turned him down, this etiquette dictated that he go into a period of mourning. Now, some of you might laugh at this. Others might say, this is a lot of rubbish. But what I'm trying to do is explain circumstances, explain the conditions that prevailed at that time. And these conditions are dictated that once a gentleman had been turned down by a woman who was always beautiful, you know, the plain women didn't have any place in society at that time. It was always a fair maiden, it was always a beautiful woman. So coming back to Sir Roger de Coverley, when Sir Roger de Coverley suffered heartbreak, etiquette demanded that he go into a period of mourning. And this mourning, you see how it was observed. It was observed for a year and a half. Now, there are certain people in our society also who observe mourning, and we have mourning that is observed at an official level. A dignitary dies or something really bad, catastrophe takes place, and we have an official period of mourning. But for something as important as Sir Roger de Coverley not getting married and being jilted by this woman, the period of mourning that he decided for himself was a year and a half. So that would be 18 months. The kind of mourning that he observes is worth thinking about. He is a very jovial natured person, but because he was in mourning, he couldn't laugh, he couldn't sing and dance, so he went around looking very, very serious. Very grave attitude he had. And the most wonderful thing about this period of mourning is that he didn't make new clothes. When I say that etiquette demanded it, etiquette at that time dictated that a lot of time and money and effort be spent on men's clothes. In the last lecture, I told you that men were wearing lace, were wearing fur and silk, just as the women were. They were wearing this very soft material which you would say is only for women to wear. But it was being worn, and not only was it being worn, but it was being worn in such a way that the display became all important. If you had it, you flaunted it. You didn't just show it, you flaunted it so that the whole world could see. So a man in Sir Roger de Coverley's position, not making new clothes, was the supreme example of sorrow and grief. So now you get the idea when I say that etiquette was all important. It wasn't just buying new clothes, it was wearing them, it was going to places where the maximum number of people would see clothes, would talk clothes. So clothes, and in other words appearance, became all important. It was the only important thing, the only thing that mattered. So Roger de Coverley not making new clothes was a very serious issue, and it showed that he was in proper mourning, and it showed people that he was heartbroken. But enough of Sir Roger de Coverley. Let us now see what other characters Richard Steele has to share with us. So the gentleman next in esteem and authority amongst us is another bachelor. Richard Steele had a special liking, it seems, for bachelors, or maybe it is the idea that bachelors had more time to spend in the clubhouses, so they would be more seen. Married men would be going around with their wives, they would have the problems of households, of problems and issues of a domestic nature. So Steele is confining himself to another bachelor who is a member of the inner temple, a man of great probity, wit and understanding. But he has chosen his place of residence rather to obey the direction of an old humorsome father than in pursuit of his own inclinations. Now, in the last lecture, I told you that Steele discusses his characters in great detail. But some characters he does not name. This is one such character. He talks about this gentleman who is worthy of respect, who has a commanding position, who exercises a lot of power. But he doesn't give us his name. He does give us a detailed description, and I'm sure if we lived in the time of Steele and we moved in the same circle, we would have been able to identify this gentleman. But since we did not, we do not know the name of this gentleman. What we do know is the description that Richard Steele has given us of this gentleman. And when he's describing this gentleman, he says that the gentleman is witty, is very intelligent, is sagacious, and he has a lot of understanding. And Steele says that this gentleman resides in the inner temple, is the member of the inner temple. Now, the kind of people who were members of clubs had to be noblemen. A lot of these were statesmen in the sense that they occupied positions at court, and a lot of them were educated in various branches of knowledge. Now, amongst these branches of knowledge, there were some that were considered worthy of being pursued by the nobility. The church was one. Theology was a branch of knowledge that noblemen and sons of noblemen could study. Law was another such branch of knowledge. Things like accounting were not considered worthy of the nobility. They were left to the common people. But medicine, theology, law, these were branches of knowledge that noblemen could study and could pursue. So this esteemed gentleman that Steele is describing now was told or instructed by his father to study law, to study the law of the land. And as far as law was concerned, the inner temple was the place to be. So he's not a member of the inner temple or that select group of noblemen who are studying law because he wanted to study law, but because his father wanted him to study law. So he, as Steele says, it is rather to obey the direction of an old humorsome father, a father who has certain ideas about what he wants his children to do and what he does not want his children to do. So this gentleman follows the dictates of his father like a very obedient, like a good son that he is. He is studying law. But let us see what exactly he is studying. So he was placed there to study the law of the land, and is the most learned of any of the house in those of the stage. Now you have the law of the land and you have the law of the stage. The law of the land is something that concerns being an Englishman. It would have to do with the rights and responsibilities of Englishmen. It would be law regarding, let's say, succession. It would be law regarding the distribution of property, the distribution of wealth. That is what his father wanted him to study. But what does the gentleman actually study? And Steele says he's the most learned of any of the house, and the house refers to the House of Lords or the House of Commons, that is Parliament. And so he is the most learned of the parliaments in the law of the stage. Remember what I told you about etiquette and about nobility and the environment of the times? There wasn't such a demand for people who knew the law of the land, but there was a great demand for people who knew the proper etiquette, the proper manners, the way in which to behave, the way in which to conduct oneself. That was what was important. And again, Steele makes little digs. He doesn't obviously moralize. Remember, the spectator does not set out to moralize consciously. That's not the goal of the spectator. The goal of the spectator is to point out what was prevalent in society, and in a very gentle and humorous manner to point out weaknesses of human beings. And that's what Steele is doing here. So the father sends him to study Littleton or Cook, and the son studies Aristotle and Longinus. So the father wants him to study law, the son studies literature, the son studies drama. The son's interest is not in legal matters, it is more in matters concerned with philosophy and with literature. So the father sends up every post questions relating to marriage, articles, leases and tenures in the neighborhood. And what does this gentleman do? He takes all these questions, every post, that is every mail that comes in. The father, confident that the son is studying law, sends him questions and says, what is the proper procedure for this? How should this matter be dealt according to the law of England? What are the processes for such and such circumstances? And what does the son do? He consults with an attorney, he consults with a lawyer, and the lawyer says, these are questions that need detailed answers. So we'll answer them when we have time. And the when never happens. So all those questions, all those queries that the father is sending, he lumps them up, he puts them on the back burner because he is more interested in staying in London, staying at the Inner Temple, and studying what he wants to study, not what his father has sent him there to study, but what he wants to study. And mind you, we still do not know the identity of this individual. So he's studying the passions themselves when he should be inquiring into the debates among men that arise from them. So what he should be studying, or what his father wants him to study, is what is to be done when there is a dispute between two men regarding property, regarding money, regarding power. But what is this gentleman doing? He's not studying that. He is studying the passions themselves. He is a gentleman, and as a gentleman, as a nobleman, he does what others of his circle are doing, and that is reading literature, not thinking of what they can do for their country, but what their country can do for them. You understand? So they are concerned more with fashion, with dances, with parties, and not with issues related to the running of the state. He knows the argument of each of the orations of Demosthenes and Tully, but not one case in the reports of our own courts. So he's not going to court, he's not studying law. What he is doing is, he is studying the philosophers of ancient times. His interest is in philosophy, his interest is in literature, not in law. But that's what his father has sent him to study. His father is confident that my son is in London, my son is in the inner temple, and my son is studying law. But the father doesn't know what the son is actually studying, what he's actually utilizing this time and space for. So he doesn't know anything about law, he doesn't know anything about legal matters, but if you ask him something related to philosophy, you ask him something that Demosthenes wrote, and he will tell you at once. No one takes him to be a fool, but nobody knows that he is a great wit. And that is because few of his thoughts are drawn from business. Most of them are fit for conversation. His taste of books is little too just for the age he lives in. He has read all, but approves of very few. Yes, it happens very frequently. You read a lot, but you don't like everything that you read. And that is something that is a characteristic of this gentleman whom Steele still has not named, and we are expected to believe in him and to create a persona that is complete and that is whole. So he's a witty person, but not many people know about it, because he's not the kind of person who goes around blabbing about himself. He doesn't blow his own trumpet. He's very serious, very reserved, and he's the kind of person who has his nose in the book all the time, a veritable bookworm, except that he's not studying the books of law as his father wants him to, but he is studying philosophy. His familiarity with the customs, manners, actions and writings of the ancients makes him a very delicate observer of what occurs to him in the present world. So whatever he has studied has been regarding the ancients. Remember, Steele talks about the gentleman studying Aristotle, studying Longinus, studying Demosthenes. He doesn't say that he is studying law. So this study ensures that he has a lot of knowledge of what the ancients believed in, what the ancients have said about certain aspects of life. He is an excellent critic, and the time of the play is his hour of business. Exactly at 5 he passes through New Inn, crosses through Russell Court, and takes a turn at Will's till the play begins. So, what's he doing? What's this gentleman doing who has been sent by his father to study law? He is enjoying his life. He's not studying the law, he's studying philosophy, and he's living the life of a nobleman in the city where everything happens, where everyone gathers to show off what they know of what is current and what they know of things like clothes and perfumes, and women and music and dancing and eating and drinking and gambling and hunting. These are the things that interest the nobleman, not a serious study like the study of law. So this gentleman is an excellent critic. He reads a lot and he passes judgment because he doesn't approve of everything that he reads. So he's an excellent critic, and the time of the play, or the time at which the theaters open, are his hours of business. That's the time when he actually functions as a critic, not as a lawyer, mind you, not the way his father wants him to, but the way he wants to function. So his hour of business is the time when the theaters open. So at exactly 5, he leaves his studies and he passes through the New Inn and he arrives at Will's Theatre, where he walks up and down until it is time for the play to begin. So keep in mind what I told you about etiquette and about what was expected of the nobility, and place this gentleman's character into that environment, and you'll see what a perfect fit he is. He has, all right, so what happens when he is waiting until the theater opens? He has his shoes rubbed, and you know, it was thought that if a little alcohol was used, it would make your shoes shine all the more. And it was something that was a necessary part of a nobleman's ensemble. So he has his shoes rubbed, his periwig powdered at the barber's. A periwig? Yes. Noblemen of that time wore wigs. It was not fashionable to wear your own hair. So they had these long curling wigs, and if you have seen pictures of Regency men, and I'll try to see if I can bring in a picture for the next class of these Regency men who were wearing these long curling wigs coming down to here, and they wore it as you and I would wear clothes. So a wig not only had to be worn, it also had to be powdered. It had to be a particular style of wig. You couldn't have wigs the way, let's say, pop celebrities wear wigs. You couldn't have one in different colors. It had to be in golden color. And because the prevalent complexion was blonde or at the most brunette, so these wigs that were worn, they had to be powdered at the barbers. Imagine the time and the money that was being spent. The shoes had to be shined, not just shined once. We people, we polish our shoes in the morning and that's it for the day. But these people, because they put a lot of store in appearance, therefore something like shoe shine and wig powdered were very important parts of their personality. So he had this particular barber's place where he would get his periwig powdered, and he was very welcome in the audience. You know, he's not the kind of person whom the actors did not like. And you need to remember that the stage in those days was not as far off as the stage is these days. The stage was pretty close to where the audience was sitting. And there were times when there was interaction between the actors on the stage and the audience. And this is something that had been the practice even in the days of Shakespeare. So there was a lot of interaction, and sometimes the actors would stop their acting and start communicating with the audience directly. So the audience was there to see the play, but the actors were also very sensible of who was sitting out in the audience. So with somebody like this gentleman being in the audience, the actors felt very happy because they could communicate very positively and they liked having him around. And this again is an instance of what this gentleman should not have been doing, but what he was doing, because if you remember from what we started off with earlier, the father had sent him to London to study law. But once in London, the son does what he pleases. And what is it that he does? He goes to the play, he watches what is prevalent in the theatre, and he acts the role of a nobleman. All right? So the next person that Steele introduces to us is one that he's naming. So very thoughtful of Richard Steele to give a name, because the previous description was about an individual whom he never named. Sir Andrew Freeport is a merchant of great eminence in the city of London. So again, an aristocrat. He's not going to introduce anyone who is less than an aristocrat, one of the nobility, because this is the class of people that he's writing for. This is the class of people that he is familiar with, and therefore that's the class of people that he's going to be describing. So Sir Andrew Devonport is a merchant, and he's not a small merchant. He is a merchant who is thought very highly in the city of London, a businessman who is a part of the Spectator Club, who is actually a nobleman, actually a person of importance, and he's important not just as a merchant or as a businessman, but he's also important as an aristocrat. So his notions of trade are noble and generous, and he calls the sea the British common. And what do you have in the parenthesis? Every rich man has some way of jesting. So, because he is rich, and he is an aristocrat, and he is a businessman, he can afford to make jokes. Even the making of jokes is not allowed to the common people. You see how biased this society is. All power, all money, wealth, property is in the hands of the aristocracy. And they get to dictate everything, even to the extent of additions and deletions in the language. So this gentleman, Sir Andrew Freeport, is one such person. And for him, the sea or the English Channel is like the British common, because that is where his trade is. For him, that is hunting ground. Okay, but more of that later. He's acquainted with commerce in all its parts, and will tell you that it is a stupid and barbarous way to extend dominion by arms. Very important point. To extend dominion by arms. A lot of our history comprises of different conquests. So and so came from such and such a place, conquered such and such a place. So and so went to such and such a country, conquered that country, and made that a part of the empire. Andrew Freeport, Sir Andrew Freeport, does not believe that you can extend your dominion by conquering different lands. So how does he want it done? He says true power is to be got by arts and industry. True power, true colonization will take place not when you conquer by force, but when you introduce your arts, your industry to other lands. That is how you will extend your dominion. You know something? Steele and therefore Sir Andrew Freeport have very, what you'd call, modern business ideas. The way in which colonization is being done in the contemporary era is not through conquest. This is through trade and industry, through the arts and industry. That is Andrew Freeport's idea, and what was being written in the 18th century is applicable to us living in the 21st century. So he says, if trade were well cultivated, we should gain from one nation, and if another, from another. Okay? So according to Sir Andrew Freeport, you can establish stronger ties if you establish trade with other countries. I have heard him prove that diligence makes more lasting acquisitions than valor, and that sloth has ruined more nations than the sword. Very good point. Sloth, laziness, has ruined more nations than the sword. Sheer laziness, sheer lack of desire to work will kill off a nation faster than if you had an enemy conquering it. So he abounds in several frugal maxims, amongst which the greatest favorite is, a penny saved is a penny got. So a bit of a miser, a bit stingy, but then he is a businessman. A general trader of good sense is pleasanter company than a general scholar. So this is how Andrew Freeport thinks, and this is how Richard Steele incorporates his thoughts and his ideas with those of the characters that he is describing. So he's a self-made man. He has made his fortunes himself and says that England may be richer than other kingdoms, but you have to make sure that you employ the proper methods. So he's a trader, he's a self-made man. He's not the kind of person who had money or property coming to him by virtue of being so-and-so's son, by virtue of being so-and-so's grandson and great-grandson, etc., etc. But his sagacity, his wisdom and intelligence can only be measured by the fact that there is not a point in the compass, Steele says, but blows home a ship in which he is an owner. England is an island, and England has always relied for trade on passages across the seas. So this idea Steele brings in, and he says that Sir Andrew Freeport is such a successful businessman that he has a ship coming in all the time. It's not just one ship that takes his stuff to another country and brings other stuff for him. He has ships coming in at all times. He has ships coming from all corners of the world. It's not just with one country that he's doing trade. He's doing trade with many different countries at the same time. So from all directions, ships are coming carrying Sir Andrew Freeport's cargo. Next to Sir Andrew in the club room sits Captain Sentry, a gentleman of great courage, good understanding, but invincible modesty. So, a very modest person. He's one of those that deserve very well, but are very awkward at putting their talents within the observation of such as should take notice of them. So, Captain Sentry is another character whom Steele introduces to us, and like the other gentlemen, he is one who has great courage, good understanding, but who is so modest that he does not like being talked about. So, Captain Sentry is named captain because he was in the army, and he conducted himself very bravely with a lot of courage. And another characteristic that Steele says distinguishes him is the fact that he is Sir Roger de Coverley's son. So you see, son and father both being in the same club. Okay, so he is a soldier, and he has served well in His Majesty's army, and now he is a retired gentleman, but he still carries the title of captain. I have heard him often lament that in a profession where merit is placed in so conspicuous a view, impudence should get the better of modesty. So Captain Sentry is one who has very decided opinions, very decided views on a number of aspects of life. But the good thing about him is that he does everything in such good humor. He does not become bad-tempered. He doesn't become what you'd call an irascible gentleman. He makes sure that he convinces everyone with his arguments. So he also considers honesty and regular behavior to be obstacles to him that must press through crowds who endeavor at the same end with himself, and that is the favor of a commander. Now, because Captain Sentry has served in the army, so he has different and very definite ideas regarding what is merit in the army. And one of the things that he points out is that the idea of merit is one that needs to be rephrased, because all soldiers and all officers are always making an attempt to be in a position where they are favored by the commander. And being a captain, he becomes one of those many people, as he says, one of the hordes, one of the masses who are trying to get the favor of the commander. And it's a tough job. It's very tough when you're trying to get the attention of your commander, and there are all these other people who also want the attention of the commander. So he says, that great man who has a mind to help me has as many to break through to come at me as I have to come at him. And it works both ways. If there is a person who is trying to get the attention of the commander, there is also the commander who wants the attention of a particular individual in his army. So if that happens to be Captain Sentry, because there are all these other people in the middle, it's as difficult for Captain Sentry to gain access to the general as it is for the general to gain access to the captain, because you have all these other people who also want to be in the commander's good books. And then, because he has very definite ideas, he says it is a civil cowardice to be backward in asserting what you ought to expect, as it is a military fear to be slow in attacking when it is your duty. So you need to be very assertive. You need to make sure that people understand you, and you need to have direct access to your general. People who are not assertive, he says, will stay in the background. They will not be able to come into the limelight and to bring their issues into the limelight if they are not assertive. So a person who is modest and who stays in the background will stay in the background and will not be able to gain prominence in the army. So he says it is a civil cowardice. What he's trying to say is that it is not enough to be brave, to be courageous in the army. You also need to be assertive. You need to make sure that you are noticed by your commander, because you have all these people who are making the same attempt, who want to be noticed by the commander, and therefore you need to work very hard. You need to be assertive. You need to have confidence in order to gain the attention of the commander. With this candor does the gentleman speak of himself and others, and the same frankness runs through all his conversation. So having served as a captain, he thinks that he is in a position of authority where he can speak on different topics. Because he has been in that situation, he can therefore enlighten other people with how he thinks things should be conducted. The military part of his life has furnished him with many adventures. Obviously, when you enter the army, you meet a very different environment. You meet people coming from different parts of the country. So it's a life full of adventures, and he relates these adventures whenever he is in company, but he's never overbearing. There is a kind of person who starts off telling you a story and who tells it in such a way that you wish he would stop. But Captain Sentry is not that kind of a person. He tells you stories. Now, when I was in the army, this was what happened. When I was posted in such and such a place, you know, we had this and I did that and somebody else did the other thing, and that was how things happened. That's the kind of story he tells, but he never becomes overbearing. It's never uncomfortable listening to him. So he's never too obsequious, he's never overbearing. You have the type of army, and we live in a country that has one of the biggest armies in the world. So we know that there are people who have a tendency to become overbearing, who boss you and who give you the impression that whatever they are saying and whatever they are doing is right, and whatever is being done by the rest of the world is unimportant and insignificant. So, and then you have the kind of person who has had command and who can relate stories, who can narrate incidents from military history or from political history that would enlighten the listeners, that would add to the knowledge base of the audience. Captain Sentry is one such person. He is not the obsequious kind. He is not the kind of person who will grovel for attention. He is not the kind of person who will become overbearing and bossy and bully you into submission. But he has the kind of nature and temperament that relates stories of the many adventures in the army, but he does it in such a way that it does not become unpleasant. It does not tire the listener. Whatever he's saying becomes very agreeable for the listener. It's a pleasant experience to listen to him. Now we're going to end here. We've still not completed this essay, but we're going to complete this in the next lecture, and go on to the third essay also. Before I wind up for today, let me go through the different points that we have covered in this lecture. We started off with a brief recap of Sir Roger de Coverley's description, which Steele has given in great detail in the first part of this essay number 2, which was published on the 2nd of March 1711. And we moved on to a description, a very detailed description of another gentleman to whom Steele does not give a name. He gives us a very detailed description, and he says that he is sagacious, he has good understanding, he is a very respectable gentleman, and he tells you the different fields in which this gentleman excels, but he does not tell you what exactly his name is. He gives you a detailed description, but he doesn't tell you the exact name. And from this description he moves on to the description of Sir Andrew Freeport, and he describes Sir Andrew Freeport as a merchant. So he starts off with Sir Roger de Coverley, goes on to this gentleman who is studying philosophy instead of law, as his father thinks, and he moves on to the description of Sir Andrew Freeport, who is a very successful merchant. He's an aristocrat, but he's one of the very few aristocrats who makes money also, who doesn't just spend it like the other noblemen, but he makes a lot of money. And he is a big businessman in London. He is such a big businessman that he is involved in the business of export and import with other countries. And where merchants generally restrict themselves to one area or one country for the purposes of export and import, Sir Andrew Freeport has business that is being conducted with many different countries, so that he refers to the sea as the British common. The sea is his playground. The sea is where he has all his ships coming in, and he says there's hardly a ship that comes in, no matter which direction it's coming from, no matter which part of the world it's coming from. There's hardly a ship that comes in that doesn't have cargo that belongs to Sir Andrew Freeport. So he's a very, very successful businessman. From the description of Sir Andrew Freeport, Steele moves to the description of Captain Sentry, who is also Sir Roger de Coverley's son, and his distinguishing traits of character are the fact that he has served in the army for a few years, and by virtue of serving in the army he has a lifestyle, or he has anecdotes, and he has adventures that he has experienced, and he relates them in such a way to other people that they become very, pleasant topics for conversation. He doesn't become overbearing in the way that certain men do who have served in the army or who have commanded. He has a very candid opinion. He's very frank and forthright, and gives you his opinions on all aspects of life, particularly those concerned with behavior and conduct inside the army. So he tells you about how it is difficult to maintain merit. He tells you how you have to be assertive, because somebody who is not assertive is never going to be noticed by the commander or the general. So these ideas Captain Sentry presents as having been the essence of life that he has spent in the army. And the good thing is that when he's talking about these things to other men, he does not become overbearing, and he maintains a pleasant manner throughout. So his manner of relating these things is so pleasant that people like listening to him. He's not obsequious. He has a certain authority with which he speaks, but he makes it all a very pleasant experience, and not the kind where you would say, oh, that's enough for now, or, you know, he's starting to speak and he's going to tire us, but he's not going to get tired of speaking. He's not that kind of a person at all. He has a very good way of relating his experiences and adventures, and the audience enjoys it when he starts to speak. I think you've had enough for today. I've had enough for today, but we will meet again, and in the next lecture we will complete this essay and go on to the next essay. Thank you very much, and Allah Hafiz.